Okay.
All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's 12:30 on the nose. My name is Maria Eisnagel. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the education director here at the Highlands Center for Natural History. Is there anyone among us for whom it is your first visit to the Highlands Center? Welcome, welcome indeed. Many of you look very familiar to me and have been to many programs and events at the Highlands Center. And for those of us who are visiting for the first time or who might benefit from a refresher, allow me to offer that the Highlands Center for Natural History is an 80-acre campus. We're a nature center in Prescott National Forest. We exist on special use permit through Prescott National Forest. Our mission is to help children and adults discover the wonders of nature and become wise caretakers of the land. So there's that discovery and that wonder piece, and then that action of becoming wise caretakers. And we follow through on that mission through all sorts of programs, from the littlest among us to adults. We have summer camps, we have fall break, spring break nature camps. Our schoolyard habitat program is a robust cornerstone program of the Highlands Center. We also offer loads of community events, like our Halloween Happening event coming up, and adult programming, of which you are a part of today with our Community Nature Study Series in collaboration with our Arizona Master Naturalist program. We are gearing up to begin our 4th cohort of Arizona Master Naturalists. That course begins in January. If your curiosity is piqued, what is this Arizona Master Naturalist program that I'm hearing about? Please talk to me after the program, or to any one of our Master Naturalists in this room today. Would you mind to raise your hands? Cool. So large representation there, with the goal being volunteering in the community as a result of gaining knowledge of our Central Highlands ecoregion that we all call home. So that is, in a nutshell, what the Highlands Center is all about. I will say that although we exist on Prescott National Forest land, gratefully so, and they are our strongest partner. Small plug for the mini-series that is going on at present. We'll have speakers from Prescott National Forest here tomorrow morning from 9 to noon in our amphitheater, as well as the following Thursday morning, if all goes as planned, we'll be able to have a demo burn here on Highlands Center grounds, a prescribed burn. That's really good information that benefits all of us. So although we are on Prescott National Forest land, that's not how we're funded. We don't receive government funding. We're a not-for-profit that exists because of the generosity of memberships and donations. If you can donate today, please do. There's a basket on your way out that helps us. Any little bit helps to be able to continue to provide quality educational programming like we're able to offer today. One tiny other note of comfort before I turn it over to our speaker. If you need to use the facilities during our time together today, please do take care of yourselves. You can exit either through the gift shop that way or out this door and around the building. There's a house there that says restrooms on the side of it. If at any point you should need to take advantage of that. Any questions for me before we get going today? Okay, well, I am delighted then to introduce our guest speaker for today, bringing us a topic that is fascinating and spooky and interesting and gross and wild and all things natural. Sarah Vincent, our executive director at the Highlands Center, will be talking to us about cannibalism. Fascinating examples from the natural world. Please help me welcome Sarah Vincent.
All right. Well, thanks, Maria, and thank you all for being here today and just being part of the community of learners that keep natural history in the forefront of our minds. And I am just so excited to have some fun with you all for the next hour and a half on this topic. I hope that this is a pretty relaxed setting. So if at any point you have a tidbit of information or a question that helps deepen this learning experience for the whole room, go ahead and just like raise your hand or interject. As you'll see later, I'm not an expert in cannibalism, and I know there are several folks in the room that might have expertise that ties into this subject. I'm going to assume there's no expert cannibal, though. And so I would love for this to be a community learning experience. So without further ado, just a couple of acknowledgments right off the top. Does anyone recognize where that image is from? Yes. Yes. So that is a conveyor belt with Soylent Green on it. And let me get my year correct. So the film was from 1973. This depicts a dystopian future. And believe me, this is not our topic for today. But I share this image because it reminds me of an individual that I'm really grateful to and that I want to acknowledge in this presentation. His name is Eric Edelman, and he is the director at the planetarium over at Embry-Riddle. And he was so encouraging to me as an educator, as a speaker, to dig into topics that are considered taboo, that are considered gross, to really just like own it. At the time, when I first gave this presentation, it probably wasn't the most politically advantageous thing for me to do, to get up and talk to a whole room about cannibalism. But he has been incredibly encouraging, and I just want to acknowledge that friendship and his own storytelling that happens at the planetarium regularly. And then I also want to acknowledge my friend and former colleague, Erin Nixon, who was an education coordinator here for a few years. And before Natural History Book Club was Natural History Book Club, of which I know there's at least 2 founding members in the room, Erin and I started our own book club during COVID. And this was the book that we chose to read together. It is a club if you have 2 people reading the same book at the same time. And so much of this presentation is based on the work of Bill Shute. So if you want to explore this topic more, if you want to go deeper, this is a book I highly recommend, and you'll definitely see some of the images from the book incorporated in this presentation. So I want to acknowledge that. All right. So, like I shared, I am not a cannibal, nor am I a cannibal expert. However, I am a student of earth science. I got my bachelor's in earth science from George Mason University. Went on to receive a master's in secondary education at Prescott College, and then most recently attended ASU for a graduate certification in nonprofit leadership and management, which is connected to my former role as education director at the center, and now my current role as executive director. But more than that, I'm a mother of 2 little ones. Sylvia is 2.5 and Chessa's 9 months. And I did preview this presentation with Sylvia this morning. And it was like super fun. So that's a big part of who I am, particularly in this chapter of my life. So lots of funny stories connected to those 2. And then I'm also a Prescottonian, been in this community for over 10 years, love it here, love the Central Highlands and everything connected to the natural world. So I'd love to at least take a moment and survey this room. I'd like to get to know each of you a little bit more, and maybe that doesn't happen right now, but what could happen right now is you could raise your hand or just blurt out, what is the strangest food you have ever eaten? Termites. Ah, some ants with chocolate. Snails, okay. Frog legs. Cockroaches in a lollipop. Love it. Mountain oysters. Ah, Google that one. Sorry? Kangaroo. Whoa. That's amazing. Anything else? Crocodile. Sorry? Octopus. Rattlesnake. Okay. I'm looking at Nam back there. I don't know why. Maybe because you were talking about food this morning? Cicadas. Prolific. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing. This entire presentation will be about things that are strange to eat. So I'm also going to survey this room, and let's just start with a baseline definition or understanding of what cannibalism is. So does a brave soul feel comfortable raising their hand and offering up a suggested definition for us to start with? Oh. Eating your own kind. Yes. Okay, eating humans, and then that evolved into eating your own kind. Does anyone want to go add deeper? Any species eating its own kind. So now I'm hearing the word species in there too. Okay. So cannibalism is the act of consuming an individual of the same species. So we're going to start with an example close to home. With all of our community nature study series, there might be broad topics, but it's so great to pull it right here into our backyard to Arizona. So does anyone recognize maybe this vista? Even just generally speaking, this is in Arizona. Ah, so these are the Dragoon Mountains. And then peeking over, you can see a valley down there, a grassland. So let's zoom into that spot. This is that grassland, special for several reasons. This is the Sulphur Springs Valley. And does anyone know, has anyone been here before? A couple of you. What is special or iconic about this setting? Yeah, so the cranes pass through here. They stop over here because this spot, the way it's drained, a lot of the water gets stuck there. So seasonally, with the monsoons, there will be these pools that develop, and there's nowhere for them to go, which makes them really popular habitat for, amphibians. So you can see in this image, there are several eggs on the grasses. And if we look a little closer, we'll see what those eggs are for. Does anyone recognize this amphibian? No friend of mine. I like that. So this is the western spadefoot toad. And if you are ever wanting to go deeper in your amphibian exploration, I highly recommend Amphibia Web for all of your identification purposes. You're getting so much more than cannibalism today. The western spadefoot is fossorial, which means burrowing. They live in very arid environments. Check. And they have a highly variable breeding season. So I mentioned those monsoons, I mentioned those puddles. They are entirely dependent on when the water comes, how much of the water comes, how much sticks around for how long when it comes to breeding. They get their name, spadefoot, from their keratinus, spade-like metatarsals, their feet. And so that allows them, or that's an adaptation that allows them to burrow. And in addition to being highly variable in their breeding season, they also are considered explosive breeders. So when it happens, it's like on, okay? And that can be, notice that range, anywhere from December to May. So let's give this a try. I'd love to hear their call. One more time. All right. So that's their breeding call. Well, it's their call. Can be connected to their breeding. But guess what else? They're also cannibals. And what I find very interesting about the spadefoot toad, and not just me, is that they're only sometimes cannibals. So let's go deeper with the spadefoot toads by joining the Fennigs in their lab over in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We're just going to watch a minute from this video.
Of this tank, listening to evolutionary biologists David and Corinne Fennig and their teams study spadefoots to better understand the role plasticity plays in evolution.
A lot of times in science, if you want to understand something, you go find a really extreme example of the phenomenon you're interested in.
Fennigs go every year to Arizona to study the toads in the field and work with them year-round in the lab. David and his group focus on plasticity in tadpoles. Certain kinds of spadefoots come in two very different types or morphs, omnivores and carnivores.
They're so different that for many, many years, for decades, biologists thought they were different species.
Omnivores are the smaller ones. They can eat pretty much anything. But if the tadpole happens to hatch in a pond rich in shrimp, some, but not all, will beef up big time. And it's not just shrimp. Carnivores will eat other tadpoles. Remember, they're the same species. Once they grow to adulthood, they look the same again.
There are different strategies for achieving the same end, which is propagating one's distinctive characteristics in the next generation.
Back in the lab, they're examining which genes are involved in this plastic.
All right. So let me just get back onto full screen. Oops. So in case you were or had some challenges hearing that, the summary of their research is that they are looking at the underlying genes that cause this same species, Western spadefoot toad, to have two entirely different physical morphs. One that's herbaceous, one that is an herbivore, and one that is a carnivore. The carnivore is the one that eats shrimp and cannibalizes its own kind. And so they mentioned this ecological term that we'll get some definition around, which is phenotypic plasticity. It's a phenomena that when changing environmental conditions allow multiple phenotypes to arise from a single genotype. Phenotype is anything physical. Genotype is associated with the underlying genetic material. Get myself back on track. So here's a visual projection illustration by Patricia Wynn. Patricia was the artist for the book I referenced at the top. So this is one of those pools in the Sulphur Valley. And you can see that the omnivore tadpoles are living on the edges where it's shallower. And there's also more plant life there, which also means, well, so that's food, but that's also shelter or places to hide. Whereas the cannibal tadpoles are being found in the center of the pool, where it's deeper and considered more pelagic or open water, less places to hide. And some of the physical differences, in addition to their size, is also going to be the changes in the gut. When you're an herbivore, you need to process your food material differently, which involves a shorter gut, as opposed to, wait, what did I say? No, plants need more. Plants need more. So you larger gut, and then the cannibals have a smaller gut. And then the cannibals also have teeth and larger jaw muscles. So why different morphs? What's the rationale? No, sorry, rationale is a bad word. What are the mechanisms that lead these tadpoles to having different morphs as an advantage to their evolutionary way forward? Well, the deeper water has larger organisms that can be sustained in that area. You heard mentioned perhaps in the video of the fairy shrimp. So they're eating these fairy shrimp. Fairy shrimp can't survive when it's super shallow. They need that deeper water because they're larger. So now you have the food source. Let's take advantage of it as opposed to ignore that it's there. And then that evolves, or that can then lead the tadpoles to take on a phenotype that allows them to eat shrimp. And at that point, why not? Why not cannibalize all the other tadpoles in that area? There's also just more competition when you can start to specialize. So remember that explosive breeding season. Remember the fact that this is so highly variable. When it rains and your habitat for breeding, and therefore your ability to extend your genes to the next generation, is so unpredictable and so variable, being able to jump into that mode as quickly as possible with the physical adaptations that you need for that specific moment is going to be advantageous for the species as a whole. So that's just our introduction. This is our format for today. Here's where we will be going. So we'll start with, some baby eating, and then we're going to move into femme fatale. We'll look at overcrowding scenarios, and then take a peek at humans, as we are one of the animal kingdom. And then finally, we will break to digest whatever it is we learned today. So we're going to start with some oldies but goodies. These are, 1980 is not the most current in ecological or biological research, but a lot of these rules still hold very true. Gary Polis, too, is also just interesting because he was a naturalist, ecologist, and then he's a noted desert ecologist, did a lot of work with scorpions. And in fact, he advised the government on desert scorpions during the Gulf War, which I thought was a fun tidbit. So Gary and his colleagues helped put together kind of these rules associated with cannibalism. Immature animals are more likely to get eaten than adults. Many animals don't recognize their own kind. When I say this is dated research, that's where a little bit of the changes have been in terms of recognizing own kind. There's been some developments where, well, are we assuming that they're not recognizing? And we've just learned more about how animals recognize each other. Females are more cannibalistic than males. Cannibalism increases with hunger and decreases in other forms of nutrition. So this is pretty intuitive. And then is often related to overcrowding. So we're going to start by looking at those first two rules together. These are examples of indiscriminate cannibals. Does anyone recognize either of those creatures? Yeah, so that's a mussel. What's over on the right? Sorry? Crawdad? Sorry? Crinoid. I don't think so. The one on the right is a polychaete worm. It's one of those feather duster worms. So if you've ever looked in a tank, like they're these little worms that suck back into this tube, and then when they come out, they make these beautiful kind of feathers that dance and wave. And then similar to the bivalves, they're filter feeding. So these are known as indiscriminate. These are examples of indiscriminate cannibals, because the way most filter feeders reproduce is they release their spawn right into the area around them, and then they filter their food right out of that. And sometimes what comes in that is their own kind. So this would be an example of, well, maybe they're not recognizing it, we don't know, but the point is they're getting nutrients from their own spawn, they're eating their own kind through that filtration process. Our next example under this topic is going to come from the insect world. And I should note too that trophic eggs are not just unique to insects, they're just more common. Various animals like fishes and amphibians and some of the gastropods will also produce basically inviable eggs. Eggs that are never intended to hatch and become an adult, or egg-like structures, and we call those trophic eggs. And trophic eggs are presumed to be able to extend the maternal investment for the offspring. So if you're mama ladybug and you come drop your eggs, your viable ones, and then you drop a bunch of trophic eggs, and then you move on because you're mama ladybug and that's what you do, then you're increasing the investment in those eggs and their survival, because you're leaving their own kind for them to have their first meal upon hatching. So it's a way of leaving more energy to the next generation. Oh, gross. Okay. So this one, so if that's an example of being a super mom, this is another very clear example of arguably being a very self-sacrificing mother. And so this is the black lace weaver. And this is an example of matrophagy or phagy. Should have looked that up before I came. But basically, mama eating. Phage being eating. I don't know, there's got to be a Latin expert in here. Matra being mom. So first, again, black lace weaver. And there are other spiders that do this. First, the mother undergoes a 3-week incubation period during which she stays within extremely close proximity to her egg sac. So she's putting her energy into protecting that egg sac. At the end of the incubation period, the mother breaks open the egg sac, allowing her 40 to 135 spiderlings to emerge into the world. And then within their first few days of emerging, the mother lays trophic eggs. Okay, so now more investment. Trophic eggs for her offspring to consume, their own kind. And then at the end of their first week, the spiderlings begin to molt. And finally, 1 or 2 days later, when the molting process is over, they cannibalize their mom. And that, there's even observed behavior in these mothers where they're inviting that. That's part of the deal. It's not like they're under stress or something and it's an abnormality. It's part of that cycle. So why? Like why? This is an ecological definition, inclusive fitness, in which the survival of an individual's genes, whether they're from an offspring or a collateral relative, is the true measure of evolutionary success. In layperson's terms or Sarah language, basically, I don't care if my personal genes go through me. I just care that they go on, period. And since my personal genes are in that individual or those individuals, you don't need me anymore. So I might as well be of use. And in this case, that use is please eat me so that my energy can go on. Yes.
The female has one group of babies alive. The male, how long do they live?
That's a good question, and I have no idea because I was in the world of matrophagy and there was no daddy eating in this scenario. But we could look that up. I'll just wager a guess. I would say that dad spider is probably going and trying to get more mama spiders in that situation. So if you're looking at that, textbook definition of inclusive fitness, it does pose this very ecological or very biologically relevant question forward, but also very philosophical question forward, which is, does altruism, like true altruism, exist in nature? So I'm going to pause on this question, and if anybody is feeling like they would love to engage on this, what are your thoughts?
I monitor bluebirds. Some of the parent, some of the birds were taken, the nests were taken over by other birds.
Mhm.
That a bird would come in, put their nest right on top of the babies.
Mm-hmm.
Mother would have flown out, but on other occasions, mother would stay on the nest, sacrificing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Julia shared an example of bluebirds, the mother staying on a nest, defending the babies from perhaps an intruder, another bird, etc., at the risk and cost of her own life. Is that an example of altruism? If the fitness, when we take into account inclusive fitness, her babies, hopefully in this scenario, are surviving. I don't know. I gotta share this too because this is just like super cool and it's Halloween month. So I also got to monitor bluebird boxes for a time in my life, and one of the neatest, grossest, coolest things I've ever seen was just what Julia was describing. Bluebird nest. Another bird species came, was like, nope, killed the babies, built nest right on top of it. But then the nest that we pulled out a year later when we were cleaning out the box, it's like striations, different layers, bluebird skulls, like right in this level. It was so cool. So, and I love bluebirds, so it was also very sad. But anybody else want to share an example of like where altruism might exist in nature, or if you're like a staunch opinion, you're like, no, that does not exist.
Well, that spider mom seemed to be rather altruistic.
Yeah, but she's getting her genes passed on through her babies.
Sarah, what about maternal sacrifice up to a certain point?
Mm-hmm.
Mom will stay there. I'm moving on. For a while,
Yeah, again, those mothers stepping up to protect the next generation. There are other examples from the mammal world. So I'll just talk about prairie dogs or the meerkats, right? Like sending out a scout who's going to go like, yip, 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 as soon as a threat is coming, knowing that like they're pulling it in, they're pulling it to themselves. And that is giving the rest of the colony or community the opportunity to go hide underground or get away. And oftentimes those animals are getting, predated. So some folks can reference examples like that. There's also some interesting examples, like when you look at ants and bees, certain workers or scouts will put themselves out there in pretty altruism looking ways. But, ultimately, this is an open question. When we circle back to humans, there are sometimes examples where you're like, yeah, that was pretty darn close. We've been talking about mothers. I'll talk about men for a moment. There are some interesting anecdotes. I won't call them studies, but where we analyze, okay, car crash on the side of the road with lots of risk, lots of danger. Who is the most likely individual to go run right into that? And oftentimes it's males. Oftentimes it's men that have reproduced already, which is just interesting. And so there are examples, and especially when we take into account, military service, there can be examples in humans where you're feeling pretty altruism-y. So anyway, that was our sidebar. Moving on to super moms. Does anyone know what this creature is? This one's weird. Sorry? Looks pretty wormy. Sylvia said it was a snake. No, this is actually an amphibian. Okay, so you got your salamanders, you got your frogs, and then this is a Sicilian. So these creatures live primarily underground, which gives them that kind of co-evolutionary traits with worms or what's the other, star-faced mole. They have a lot of commonalities with those. But these mothers have a very, very thick skin layers. And the skin of the Sicilian mother forms the first meal, the nutrients for the babies. So that is a picture, sure enough, of babies with those beautiful fetal teeth just scraping the skin off of their mom. And that is a pretty interesting example of cannibalism. But wait, there's more. So some Sicilian moms have adapted not just to have their skin be the first meal, but that lower image is the inside. It's not a womb, but it's like the Sicilian equivalent of a womb, where the babies are actually eating, the oviduct lining of their mother before they enter the world. So there you go. So someone said at the top they were vegetarian, so they have not engaged in cannibalism. Well, let's explore the world of the herbivore cannibals. How is that even possible? So this, do you recognize these larvae? Yeah, these are mosquito larvae, but more specifically, these are elephant mosquito larvae. Elephant mosquito larvae do not drink blood. They're the good guys. I really appreciate elephant mosquitoes because they're beautiful too. They're like little fairies. They're kind of iridescent. They're larger, certainly not the size of the elephant, but they get their name for a reason. But their entire adult life, nectar, plants, vegetarian, herbivore, and yet as larvae, they have this insatiable need to feed, and they will attack. I mean, that one you can obviously see as cannibalizing its sibling, because we're going to assume that all of those have been laid together, sibling aside, or whatever that's called. And there is a word for it. Fratricide. There you go. So there's fratricide. And but you can also see that visibly there's going to be an adaptation for that mosquito larva because it's already bigger, it's already stronger, it's more developed. So essentially the clutch is laid, the larva hatch, and then one will pretty much eat every other sibling in order to get ahead and then go on to become a peaceful living herbivore.
Where do you find those?
Oh, so that's a great question. These are in the southern United States and down into Central America. Because that one has already eaten others. So this one, like similar to those phenotypic morphs of the toads, this one has already consumed siblings, and it's going to go on to probably consume that whole row. So it looks different because it's, well, larger, stronger, more developed. Yeah, go ahead. As adults, they don't. They're eating nectar, both species. So like you're probably familiar with the mosquitoes that bite us, those are all females. The males are off eating bananas or whatever. Sorry. But this is an example of a species where both females and males are eating nectar or bananas. Don't quote me on that. That's not, definitely look that up. The banana part. Okay, so then this is an example. This is a snail. A lot of snails are herbivores, some are not. But in the herbaceous snail group, they can be seen cannibalizing their own kind, particularly if their fellow has died. So they're like scavenging. And there's still some question around this, which is why I put a question mark up there. But there is some research to indicate that this helps the snail establish their gut bacteria. So if you consume one snail in your lifetime, your gut's nice and healthy because you get whatever they had. And then that helps you in your own fitness move on through your days and into the next generation. So those are, well, I'm going to keep cruising because of time. Let's look at the males. So then this is a fish that is displaying filial cannibalism. So we looked at babies that were eating moms, and we looked at side to side, but this is a parent consuming its young, same species. And so it takes a lot of work, and I know I don't need to tell half of you this, but it takes a lot of work to raise kids, and you got to get your energy somewhere. And in this case, in many fish species, the dad is in charge of taking care of that energy investment for the young. And it's tough work because you can't go out there and eat and hunt and like do whatever it is you do on a normal basis to get your nutrients. So why not just eat some of the eggs? You don't need all of them, and it's important that you stay alive so that you can protect the rest of them. Especially, it's especially if the clutch is small, the male might just eat the whole clutch and they start over. So if this was like a below average clutch, let's just like not even waste our time on it. Let's eat it. So then these are also fish. Here's the seahorse. And so fries are what you call baby starfish, so now you know. And I use this as an example because, okay, yes, eating some of the young ones there. But in the definition of cannibalism, if we go back to the top, you'll see that word consume. Consume. We think about that as taking something in through the mouth and eating it. However, the pouch that the starfish has, so that's the male carries the babies in a pouch, kind of like a kangaroo, but not exactly because it's a male. And sometimes they will reabsorb the fries that are in that pouch under certain environmental conditions. So is that cannibalism? It depends, but it depends on how you are defining that. But some could consider that the consumption of the same species. Then there's this guy and everything that is represented by our mouth brooders, which is just such a good insult if you're ever like, Anyway, mouth brooder. So I've been very creative with my insults since I'm no longer allowed to cuss because I have like little ones around me. So if you hear Sylvia ever say "you're a mouth brooder," you like know where she gets that from. Okay, so this is an investment in the future generation. So you're out there, you're in the ocean, you're in the water, and there's this clutch of eggs, and you need to protect them from all of the myriad of predators that would love that little energy nugget in their gut so that they can use that to propel themselves forward. Well, one strategy would be put them all in your mouth, close your mouth when other things come by. It's high risk, high reward, because the high risk is if you get eaten, there goes the whole brood. But high reward because if you're able to protect them through those critical stages of development, then you're really giving them a good shot at, or a better shot at survival than if they were out in the open. However, the downside to keeping babies in your mouth is that occasionally you're going to swallow them. So there is some collateral damage to this method, which is cannibalism. Another example from the ocean. So this is, again, that side to side, that brotherly or sisterly consumption. So this is the inside, the oviduct of the sand tiger shark. So tiger sharks, well, many sharks are, I love this word, so I had to say it. Ovoviparous. Ovoviparous. Am I getting that? I see a couple nods. Okay, great. So basically, like, mammals carry their babies inside. Most fish don't. They lay them, they're external. Ovoviparous means that you're like still an egg layer, but you're carrying those inside the body. And so if you're an ocean person or like to walk the beach lines, occasionally you may have seen like these black cases that little either rays or sharks babies like were carried inside their mother, but then released from that sack, and you can see them open. Anyway, it's just fascinating stuff, a little bit in the weeds from this presentation. The point is that sand tiger sharks will have more than one baby inside that sack, and only one is going to come out. So the point is that the survival of the fittest mentality is going on right inside the mother's body as one baby goes on to refine its killing instincts, because that's going to be important too, but also get that nutrient start right from its siblings. I just had to include this. Crocodiles do sometimes eat each other, but it's very rare. It's more when they're under stress or very hungry. That is a croc shoe for those of you that are unfamiliar with the brand. Okay, so these guys are like, I'm going to linger on these ones because these are right in our backyard, right here in the Central Highlands. Lots of interesting stuff going on with the acorn woodpecker. So acorn woodpecker brood nesters. That means they hang out in a family, a brood, and they work together to get the resources they need to lay their young, to take care of their young, to take care of each other, to defend from squirrels, to keep their territory, which is the granary tree, right, with all the acorns that have been stashed away in there. They're guarding that from other woodpeckers, from other animals, particularly those squirrels, because they're so annoying. So that's life history in 30 seconds of the acorn woodpecker. Now, what they will do is they will cannibalize each other's eggs or young. Why? Like, why are they doing this? So 80% of eggs laid on the first day of a laying bout, which is 38% total, were destroyed and eaten by other mothers in the study that I'm citing, which is from Walter D. Koenig and Ronald L. Moom. I'm probably saying his name wrong. That's a lot of cannibalism. That's a lot of destruction. Because, well, let me not get to the because yet. And then as soon as multiple females laid eggs in the nest on the same day, the egg eating basically stopped. So, and rather than becoming kind of territorial and furious and like eating each other's babies, they started to work together and care for the whole clutch. So these birds, because they're brood nesters, because they work together in all aspects of life, including child rearing, it is very important that, hey, I'm going to work with you, but only within reason. Like, I don't want your kids to have an advantage over my kids. And so we're going to need to sync that. And we're all like in agreement of that. Because what was really mind-blowing, or what was also mind-blowing about some of these observations, was that if you were coming to cannibalize my eggs because I laid a couple days early, I might join you in that cannibalism. So it's not just like, it's not like, well, those are my kids, I won't touch that. It's like the whole brood is synced to like get everything equal and shared amongst the team. Yeah.
Are they laying all the eggs in the same nest? Or different?
I think they're in like nearby nests. They're nests like near each other. Or maybe the same nest
I
too.
thought they would share nests too, and then if one female lays her egg, another one will come in and destroy those eggs. So like
Totally. So they could absolutely be nest sharing, and maybe they do that exclusively. My understanding is that they'll share nests, but they'll also share, nearby nests, that the whole brood is going to be like kind of in a granary zone. But absolutely, you might share a nest with your sister or a couple of other females. Sure.
how much food?
Yes, availability of food, which ties into, well, almost to overcrowding. Not that I know of, but certainly can phone a friend from the audience if anybody knows if the males participate in this behavior.
I'm kind of wondering if that batch of eggs is a sacrifice to give the rest of the mothers more energy to get through their laying process.
Yeah, totally, just like with the trophic eggs. All right. This one makes me uncomfortable. Marie, you want to talk about this one? Ugh. Snowy egrets, beautiful birds, and like they're really only going to invest in one of those chicks, and they just know it. Or well, as if I can get in the brain of a snowy egret. But they often will have, they will invest, aka like feed and nurture one of those babies, knowing that it will grow faster, stronger, and prey on its fellow. We'll just cruise through that one. Yep. There also are examples where if there is disease in a nest, the best way to maybe clear that is going to be for the mother to cannibalize, or I say mother, is going to be for an invested individual to cannibalize the diseased part of that nest in hopes that the others might survive. Whew, so that was just like babies. These other sections go quicker though. So, but you came here today because I know you saw on the flyer, you were like, that's the example of cannibalism I remember from my childhood. So let's talk about females being more cannibalistic than males and kick it off with, so who is that most infamous cannibal? Maybe there's a couple different answers. Yeah. Oh, I already have, sorry, before we get to pictures, we have some definitions first. So Gay said the praying mantis, and I would second her number one commonly known natural cannibal from nature. So the praying mantis and several others, when we start to talk about femme fatale, we need to get a working definition of sexual dimorphism. So this is the distinct difference in size or appearance between the sexes of an animal, in addition to the difference between sexual organs themselves. So this is when, we see it in birds all the time, but we also see it in the animal kingdom across the board, right? This is the male lion with a mane and the female without a mane. This is also the hugely different size between females versus males in the praying mantis and the black widow. So this is the praying mantis. And so this only occurs in 13 to 28% of natural encounters between praying mantises. That natural encounters, right? So like just another little, I don't know if this is a rabbit hole necessarily, but for a lot of animals, we observed them for a very, very long time in kind of human settings. So we would take them out of their natural environment and then observe them in a lab, let's say. Animals, surprise, behave differently in a lab than they do out in their natural environment. So when we see a percentage like 13 to 28% in natural encounters, this implies that the observation took place in the wild, quote unquote, wild or natural habitat of the praying mantis. Cannibalism goes up, surprise, in a human-made setting. So when you put a bunch of praying mantises in the lab, they're going to cannibalize at higher rates. Just interesting fact that is pretty universal with a lot of the examples we're talking about. So anyway, this happens, and then it benefits the female because you're getting a big meal right there upon laying your young and getting them ready for hatching and moving into the future. So the benefits for the males, well, the males that are cannibalized by the females might pass on more of their radioisotope to their mates, which may increase the chance of their DNA being passed on to the next generation. Go translate that. I don't know what that means. But basically, it's like they think that there's some interaction going on in this cannibalism where the male is getting the opportunity to pass on, like through chemicals, hormones, however you want to view that, that increases the fitness of the female, which increases the chance that the offspring are going to then survive and pass on that male's genetic material. So here's the black widow, another valid answer for famous female cannibals. Black widow, beautiful spider. I really enjoy. Sylvia asked me, she's like, do you like spiders? And I said, like, I like them, just like not near me or on me. But I really, really like spiders, just like over there, or like, yes. So black widow is very graceful, very beautiful, and also cannibalistic. So the black widows are cannibalizing above 30% in the wild. That is the male, so you can see some very distinct sexual dimorphism because the female is huge compared to that male. And so the males seem to welcome their fate by actively somersaulting. And there's some great pictures in that book I referenced at the top of like they do this kind of dance to almost like invite or attract the female to eat them. Crazy. And so then this guarantees their future fatherhood. Why? Right? Because the black widows use cannibalism to assert their partner preference. So they actually like chase down and kill without mating a bunch of males that they have deemed unfit to mate with. And then they engage in kind of this, so that decreases their chances over here, right? So if I'm male, like somersaulting over here, like come eat me, like basically that guy over there, it's like, go eat him, but like don't mate with him, just eat him so that his line is done. But then like come over to my genetic line. You can eat me because like look how attractive I am with my somersaults, but like first mate with me. Okay? So like it's a really interesting way to invest in the passing on of your own genetic material into the next generation. All right, so we'll kind of circle back to that other rule, but when we look at increases in hunger, decreases in form of other nutrients, and overcrowding, this is where we start to get into those scenarios that are like, well, no, I'll let you be the judge. We're gonna get into those scenarios. Okay, so this guy, tiger salamander. Love tiger salamanders. They're the only salamanders. Like if you go out to Aspen Creek right now or Granite Creek or any creek in this area, there's a chance that you will see tiger salamanders. They're beautiful. They're like when they're big and they're spotted or like kind of striped, and they're just like beautiful organisms. And they are also cannibals, especially when there's overcrowding. And surprise, those sitting pools of water that these salamanders are dependent upon are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and more spotty in their appearance. So there's less of them. They're just overcrowded because the salamanders are more dependent on less of their critical habitat for mating, growing, etc. So these are the salamanders eating each other in a crowded scenario. And this is a pretty well-studied area, you know, like you can literally mathematically take the quantity of water and the number of salamanders and predict how much cannibalism there will be. Oh my goodness, these guys. Oh, does anyone recognize these ones? Yeah, yes, these are Jerusalem crickets. And they kind of freak me out, I'll be honest. Cause like they're so slick. They like live underground and they're so like slick looking. And if you're just like sitting on the ground and you're just like with your hand, you're just kind of being a kid and just digging, and then you're like, it's like a slick, like, and then they bite. They have these like really intense bites. I've never been bitten, but I think we fear the things that we've never experienced more than the things we actually have. So I fear that very much. And so Jerusalem crickets are actually like locusts. And so they have this kind of swarming migration reproduction thing that happens. So they will engage in a mass migration of spectacular display. Like what? How many Jerusalem crickets is that? They're also known as Mormon crickets. That is a lot, like a lot. And they're all just going. And here's where things get like really, really weird. So they are in that big overcrowded population, and they're all starving, and resources are limited, and they know resources are going to continue to be limited because they all came out at the same exact time. So that means they're all going to go out into the world and start eating their food at the exact same time, at the exact same stage, and that's going to limit the resources. So it only makes sense to start eating each other. So basically, like, they're just trying to eat the cricket in front of them. Like, they are literally like going, and then meanwhile, the cricket behind them is trying to eat them. So they're kicking backward, you know, fitness, like, I am fit, I can kick you off and you're not going to eat me, while also being able to propel themselves forward enough to eat the individual in front of them. It's just like absolutely diabolical. And I know I'm putting judgment on the scenario. It's a beautiful thing in nature. But this is like pretty intense. Oh, yeah, and they're up in Utah. They'll come down into the like the Colorado Plateau. So they are in Arizona too. I don't think we could check a range map in terms of the Central Highlands, but I haven't seen them here. my finger has never touched one in the Central Highlands, but it's touched several times on the Colorado Plateau. And also noteworthy too is the two limiting factors when you think about like, okay, what is their nutrient limitation? It's protein and salt. So let's eat a cricket. That's like literally, okay. Whew, okay, so then this is where, poultry. So we humans put poultry in like very tight places, just on top of each other. And in the bird world, it is not uncommon to have sort of a hierarchy, a pecking order. And so this is like a social order of dominance. And there are several causes that can lead to cannibalism in poultry birds. So this is a chicken, but this is going to apply to turkeys and ducks, etc. Light and overheating, crowd size, their nutrition or lack thereof, injury or death, genetics, and even learned behavior. So, I mean, this is age old. I remember playing this game from like the 70s. It was a board game called Inventions. And like, it was you had to like get patents, and it was really nerdy and weird. But like, one of the things we had to get a patent on was like these chicken eyeglasses. And I remember asking my dad, I'm like, what is this? And he explained to me, like they'll peck each other's eyes out. So like, this is an issue as old as time that anyone who's raised chickens is like, we gotta protect the chickens' faces, their beaks, their eyes, because they'll just go for it. So there you go. It's wearing a little contraption that prevents it from pecking, but also protects itself. Oh, these make me so sad. Okay, so hamsters, like the common hamster is a wild animal, and really used to like the steppe country, the STEPPE country, like Europe and Eastern Europe, very arid country, kind of mountainous. Like they're underground, so they're hanging out underground a lot, not a lot of water, not like used to like sitting in bright light in a cage, totally exposed for its entire life on a clump of wood chips. And so the common hamster, there's a lot of really very interesting studies on the common hamster, both in the wild, as their habitat has been transformed into basically like corn land, but also in captivity. And so cannibalism in hamsters is a pretty like well-studied thing. The mother will cannibalize the young, and it's thought to have so much to do with stress and captivity, but there's also potentially other factors, like have populations of the hamster been genetically modified, or is there a learned behavior now introduced to a population of hamsters that involves cannibalism of babies? So like they'll put them in like their total natural scenarios, but they're still eating their young. So it's a sad example, but it's an interesting example when we start to think about that wildlife-human interface and how humans may be impacting the cannibalism in certain populations. They are really cute. So then this is another it is very uncommon for chimpanzees to cannibalize each other. However, Jane Goodall, pictured in this photo, has observed, and others have observed this act in the natural world. However, we know that the habitat of the chimpanzees and other apes is reducing over time. And that creates a smaller area for populations to live, thrive, puts them under stress for resource. And when you need a whole heck of a lot of resource to sustain an adult chimpanzee, then that can then stress out individuals who can then cannibalize for any number of reasons, whether it's young and they just don't have the ability to care and rear that young, or whether it's kind of side by side, like there's not enough room here, or whether it's more of a scavenging opportunity. So a chimp has passed away for other reasons, and then the gets cannibalized. Ooh, male carnivores, though. This one is a little bit more common. So this is like, and this is of deep frustration to conservationists or some conservationists, because basically, you know, the polar bear, the lion, the tiger, like these are examples of wild populations that are in decline. And we as humans or as conservationists may, not all, but may have a vested interest in their young surviving. So we do all these things. We like create these preserves. We're like, everybody stay away, no poaching, hunting, etc. And then like basically you get this like pack, of lions. Pack? They're pride. Oh my goodness, how did I mess that up? It's pack of wolves, it's pride of lions. Okay, you get this pride, right? And it's all the females, and they're hanging out with the male, and he's got a bunch of females, and there's some babies there. And then like this other male just comes in and kills the babies. And then mates with all the females, and they have to start all over again. And you're like, oh, come on. Or you might be. But this is, and occasionally, not often, occasionally there will then be cannibalism of those, of that clutch brood. They're not broods. Clutch? They're not clutches. It's not a clutch of baby lions. That cohort. There's some natural components here. However, where the natural component is, well, I want my genetic material to pass on, not yours. Okay, so that is natural. What is unnatural then would be the cannibalism, because now if you add the further stressors on that population, then they need the energy from those that were killed. Ooh, so what about humans? That's why you all came here, right? So this is a cave in France. Nope, let me triple check. That's it's France, right? Thank you. Ooh, good, because that wasn't fully in my notes. Well, it's on the Rhone River. And this is 80 meters above. So this is like a perched cave. And what has been found in there is evidence of cannibalism from Neanderthals. So what is evidence of cannibalism that dates back over 100,000 years ago? Like, what could we be talking about here? Well, the tools that they're using, and then the marks on the bones. So you can see the marks from processing your food on the bones. You picture, processing that with a knife or some sort of blade to remove the meat. And so you can see the exact same marks on, the deer or the bison, the exact same marks as you would see on the bones of other Neanderthals. And I acknowledge that Neanderthals are not human. I said human, but we're getting closer. So there's a lot of that comparative analysis going on the different biological, but also human-made remnants in that cave. So why? Why? There are a couple of reasons humans will cannibalize each other. Do we know the answers about the Neanderthals over 100,000 years ago? Not necessarily, although people are doing their best to theorize around that. But these are several of the reasons that have been identified why human populations or hominid populations would cannibalize each other. So we'll start with the survival scenarios, and I know that all of you have at least one of these anecdotes somewhere buried in your brain. Hopefully not super top of mind, but. So the code of the sea. Oh, I had the privilege of working with several boat captains in my life. One of them was Captain Billy, and Captain Billy just thinking about him just makes me so happy because he was like exactly what a captain should be. He was so jolly. He like loved like fine things like treasure and like fine silver and like silk and just full mariner, like big belly, just like full spirit of the sea. And he taught me a lot. We never actually drew lots, okay, because we were just like boating around the Chesapeake Bay and getting in a big ship craft where we would have to eat each other. It was like not in our cards, but it is actually in the code of the sea. So it's a custom of the sea that was practiced by officers and crews of ships and boats on the open sea, as distinguished by maritime law, which is distinct and a coherent body of law governing maritime questions and offenses. And among the customs was the practice of cannibalism among shipwrecked survivors by drawing lots to see who would be killed and eaten and what others would survive. So this is a classic example, shipwreck, no food, of what a survival scenario would be for that would then prompt cannibalistic behavior. And in fact, this is like actually planned too, like planned cannibalism, because they're actually drawing. It's like, we're going to do that. This was not planned, right? So the Donner Party, they were moving across the country. This is in 1846, 1847. That spans the course of a winter. Basically got shut down in their route because of snow. And what ensued was cannibalistic behavior, super unfortunate. Some of it was similar to custom of the sea, where there was a killing beforehand, and some of it was more of that scavenger flavor, where someone had already passed. This is an example. So the city of Leningrad during World War II was under siege and cut off from resources. And there were examples of folks having to resort to cannibalism. In addition to surviving in addition to being in the terrible position where you are surviving off of wood dust and wallpaper glue and boiled leather belts, these are the types of survival situations that can result in cannibalism. So let's move on from that, because that's like...
There was one recently, 1972, I believe, the soccer team that crashed.
Yeah. Ugh. Okay. So learned cannibalism. So here's my big disclaimer. I'm gonna enter into a world this whole time I haven't been an expert in any of these fields, but I'm about to enter into a world where I will be sharing examples that are coming from people's cultural or spiritual beliefs. I won't go too deeply into it, but I will share, in Aztec culture, there are examples of cannibalism associated with a spiritual belief or a ritual. So this is kind of a learned tradition around cannibalism, whether it was associated with war or whether it was associated with like certain natural cycles, like the coming of the rains or crops, and ensuring that their population would survive into the future, but layering in that spiritual aspect, that culture that humans just tend to do. Cannibalism was integrated into that. So that would be an example of learned cannibalism. The other pretty famous example of learned cannibalism comes from certain funerary practices. So this is Papua New Guinea. And there were funerary practices in which the flesh, the body of the individual who had died was consumed by the inner circle of folks as part of their way of mourning and moving on. And why this example is particularly famous to ecologists, I should say biologists and anthropologists, to all sorts of ologists, is because there was a really unfortunate disease that came from the consumption of what was the brain matter of individuals. So it messes with the proteins, the prions in an individual's brain. Think about mad cow disease. So we were seeing evidence of this disease afflict this particular population, and it was traced back specifically to the consumption, not of human flesh per se, but of human brain matter. So just to move away from humans for a minute, just take a quick break. Not that this is like a whole lot better, but this is analogous to chronic wasting disease that is showing up in ungulate populations. This is a deer. And again, this just highlights that human wildlife interface. As there's overpopulating of, let's say, the white-tailed deer, right? There's more competition for resources, which stresses out the population, which can lead to atypical behavior, which can involve, eating the antlers of another ungulate, let's say. And antlers are in very close proximity to brain matter, which then can introduce a similar type disease, the chronic wasting disease, into certain ungulate populations. Inadvertent cannibalism under stress. I just made up that term. So then there's the pathological cannibalism. And there is enough true crime podcast out there for everyone to learn about that type of cannibalism. So I just chose to show cute pictures of kittens and puppies and just remind us that the world is good. The world is good, and most humans are like really, really good, or at least neutral. Sylvia really liked that picture. She did. So then there's auto-cannibalism. So those Latin people out there, okay, they're thinking like auto, that's like self-cannibalism? What? Okay, so there's some booger eating happening in that picture right there. So is that cannibalism? I mean, by technical definition, it's the same species, and you're consuming yourself as an individual. I don't know. Then there's also maybe a little bit more, because I saw Jane shaking her head. She's like, that's not cannibalism. I do that all the time. That's not cannibalism. I'm just kidding. But maybe more of an argument would be you may have heard of or participated in this practice yourself. Some individuals, after they give birth, will then go on to consume their own afterbirth, their placenta. Maybe it's in a capsule, maybe it's in a steak, maybe it's whatever. So this happens, right? And this would be an example of self-cannibalism in the event that the individual who gave the birth is eating it themselves. And maybe some of you got to see my friend Doug Humes present as John Muir recently. He was sharing with me an example of a deer that had given birth in his yard, and he like filmed the whole thing because that's what we do. And the deer ate the afterbirth. So this is an example of auto-cannibalism. One of the, there may be a couple of benefits to this practice. One is if you're that deer out in the wild or that human out in the wild and there are predators around like a saber-toothed tiger or a coyote, then it might be really good to eat that up real quick so that it's not right there at this precious site that you are now probably glued to, at least for, depends on the species, but you're glued to that site for at least a little bit. So being able to clear that up in a way that's going to reduce predation can be beneficial. And then maybe there's a nutrient component here. That's all I'll say about that. Yep.
I would not have a total issue with the trophic areas in their mouth, and they go right through the rest of the room. But the placenta type of thing now, or if you get into afterbirth and the fetal tissues, that your I would consider that cannibalism.
Totally. I mean, there was also when I was putting together this slide, there's also like, so breastfeeding, right? In that consumption, you're consuming milk, okay, like that is of the same species, that is like a physical material, but also in that there some skin transfer and things like that. So how far do you go with this? Because it is the same species. And part of what I hear Jane saying too is that nutrient component, being able to pass things on through what the mother in this case consumes while they're caring for a young one, or right before they're caring for a young one. So yeah, still like lots to learn, especially when it comes to women's health and all that fun stuff. All right, and then finally, and lastly but not leastly, there is symbolic cannibalism in the human world. So many of you may be familiar with the Christian tradition of communion, where we break bread and drink wine, or when I was a kid, it was grape juice. And those are symbols that represent the body and the blood of Christ. So this is an example of symbolic cannibalism, where we are consuming what is representing the same species of individual. And that brings us right up to the end, right back to Soylent Green. And I want to pause here and just see if anybody has any questions or anything they want to share that connects back to our topic today of cannibalism in fascinating examples from the natural world. Mm. Mm. If we go right back to the top of that working definition, that working biological definition of cannibalism, the act of consuming an individual of the same species, which does not necessarily, in fact, with many of our examples, does not necessarily result in the death of the individual being consumed.
Then you get into
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you hear that? She called your mom a cannibal. I'll call her mouth brooder. I'm sorry. Whoa, whoa. Any other just questions, pondering, any other fascinating examples? Go ahead.
One of the things we can add to the analysis is fratricide. And I can speak to that from experience. Years and years ago, right? And I got something to talk about. One day, babies are coming out. And I should have had the kids think outside immediately.
Right.
Because it was a full baby.
Yep.
They got home tonight. By the end of the day, they were all
Yeah. And Ray, that brings up an example of fratricide cannibalism that I wonder, just throwing it out there, if the contained, space plus the lack of other resources for nutrition then led to an increased percentage of cannibalism. I think it's overcrowding and not enough nutrients if I were to use my amateur cannibalism diagnosis. But that, yeah, certainly good example of cannibalism. And kind of, kids are great. Just kids are great.
But under, when I was in the museum in New York, there was a son of a famous man.
Mm-hmm.
And they think he was a lot of things he said back.
Oh, well, that would be under learned, perhaps. Just
These other people besides the foreigner that came in.
right. So I think part of that culture was learned cannibalism.
Those are also hipsters. They're just different.
Well, and I didn't linger on pathological, but because Julia brings it up, pathological is like when there is some sort of like mental health diversion from the norm, right? So like are different cultures or groups of people that might practice a behavior as part of their way of living, like that would be more in the learned category as opposed to like an individual that is out of step with the cultural norms or practices of so I think there's a distinction there, and certainly not an expert, and there's a lot of writing on Papua New Guinea and different cultures from around the world.
Back to praying mantis.
Uh-huh.
Percentage of encounters in nature of the cannibalism of mating in copulation
Oh.
with a male. I always thought that's when that happened, because where the brain getting
Uh-huh.
large while the male's copulating.
Uh-huh.
And
Right. Yeah, I don't think, at least from what I have read about to date, the females are not getting cannibalized. The males are the ones getting cannibalized.
only during mating.
Right, she's biting off the head of the male that is copulating. And I believe, I can check my notes, but I believe that was like 15 to 30% in nature. And then when you add in some examples of fratricide that Ray highlighted, I'm sure females are getting eaten. I just don't know what percentage that would be. Yeah. I don't know about Fiji at all, other than there was an X-Files episode. But I do know that in the example of Papua New Guinea, there was actually intervention where there was then a concerted effort, kind of a law that put to end the practice of cannibalism in response to the disease. But you know, so I don't know the answer to is this still occurring or what happened in Fiji specifically. But I do know that there are other examples where it's been. Right. I don't think that and some of I know there's some folks with more anthropological background than me in this room, But to my knowledge, cannibalism is not a common practice in cultures around the world today. I'd be more nervous about like getting bitten by a Jerusalem cricket than encountering a population of cannibals. All right, any other questions or comments? Well, I will spend some time lingering here if you want to come say hello or share any of those one-on-one or with each other. I'm sure others will be floating around. A reminder that if you're interested in the Master Naturalist program at all, there's several folks that would love to talk to you. Otherwise, don't be a stranger. Come by anytime. Have a beautiful Halloween, fall, creepy season. And thank you so much for going out on a limb and joining me today for Cannibalism, Fascinating Examples in the Natural World.